We are in the middle toward the end of chapter 1 of Tanya. We're on page 10, and we are just discussing, if we would go up a bit, the idea that we have two souls, a godly soul and an animal soul. And we said this was a tremendous, innovative thought of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, that we have two souls. Of course, in the Talmud, we have the concept what's called a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination, a godly inclination. But people didn't really understand that as two separate combative entities. It was more like there's you, and sometimes you have this Yetzer Tov, your good nature that takes you over, and sometimes you have your Yetzer Hara, your bad one that takes you over. And the Alter Rebbe says, no. We've got two separate souls going on inside of us. Two completely separate souls, which allows the possibility of you being the godly soul, even when the animal is taking over. Even when you're under the animal, you innately are still a godly soul. Because the godly and the animal are two completely separate entities. The animal is taking over, but that doesn't change who you are. Your definition is the godly soul, and many other significant ideas. Once we establish that we have these two souls, we're talking about them. And the first soul we talk about is the animal soul. So if we look inside, we see the Rebbe gives a proof text from Isaiah, from Yeshaya, to prove that we have two souls. V'neshamos ani asisi, souls I have made. That verse, that pasuk is talking about Adam Harishon, the first man, one person. And he says, neshamos, souls. So that proves, the Alter Rebbe says, that there's two souls in every person. Now again, that's not original to the Alter Rebbe. If you look inside, we actually see this is reference to the Eitz Chaim, Reb Chaim Vital, who's writing down the teachings of the Arizal. So a long time before the Alter Rebbe, we have this concept that everybody has two souls. But again, how many people out there learn the Eitz Chaim and understand the Kabbalah of the Arizal? The Alter Rebbe is saying, I'm telling this for Klal Yisrael. The Jewish people need to know this. They need to know how to define themselves. They need to know that they are a godly soul. Yes, you have the animal. Yes, it sometimes takes control. But you're a godly soul. And when the Rebbe starts talking about the souls, he says, Shein shtei nefashos. So Isaiah said, Neshamos ani asisi, which I translated as, souls I have made. And then the Alter Rebbe in the Tanya, now in his own words, says, Shein shtei nefashos, that they are, again, translation, two souls. So it's interesting that Isaiah, Yeshaya, uses the term neshamos, plural of neshama, to express soul. And the Alter Rebbe uses a different term that also means soul. He uses the word nefashos, plural of nefesh. So one question we would right away say is, wait, why is the Alter Rebbe not sticking with the original syntax, the original word choice of Yeshaya, of Isaiah, to say neshamos, neshama, neshamos, and he says nefashos, nefesh, nefashos. Why is he switching from neshama to nefesh? Both could be translated as soul, but nothing's random. As we said in the introduction, the Alter Rebbe spent 6 weeks on just thinking, contemplating, determining about one letter of vav, which means and. Use it or not use it in a certain chapter of Tanya. If he's changing a whole word, there's a reason. Something else that people wonder when we're looking here is, so here the Alter Rebbe established that everyone has two souls. We see this by Isaiah, Adam, the first man, the Shemos and the Asisi. Adam is the prototype Jew. He has two souls. We also do. Now let's talk about them. And what did the Alter Rebbe choose to talk about first? The animal soul. So why the Alter Rebbe is, you'd think he starts with a godly soul. No, starts with the animal. Why? So to briefly explain both of these concepts, our first question again was, Isaiah uses the word neshama, the plural neshamos. And when the Alter Rebbe is talking, he says nefashos, the plural of nefesh. So why are we switching from neshama to nefesh? And the reason is actually because both mean soul, but they don't mean the same thing. Neshama is a much higher level entity than nefesh. Nefesh is like the lowest term we could use for spiritual entity, aka what we call soul. Neshama is already a more godly term. Isaiah, Yeshaya, Neshamos ani asisi, I, God, have made We're talking the level of God's creation, both the godly soul and the animal soul are neshamos. They're both very spiritual high entities. But then they both travel and travel and travel. And of course, as we learn later in Tanya, we'll learn much more details about the traveling. But just to be simple here, they go through the 4 spiritual worlds until they enter the body. And during that trip, they change. Now, they both change. But the godly soul still retains itself as a neshama, as such a godly entity, even though she went through 4 worlds and changes. The animal soul, since of course she started off lower in the first place, gets changed much more. When we're talking about God made, like on the highest level of the 4 spiritual worlds, called the world of Atzilus, the world of being, they're both called neshama. We go from Atzilus, which is pure God energy, to the next world, Bria, where there's some sense of self. Bria means the world of creation. There's some existence, nothing negative, but existence. Existence already means limitation on God's overwhelming and only soul reality. So that's a change. That's a big impact on both the godly and the animal. And then they travel further and they go to the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation. In the world of formation, there's more else, more that what we would call evil. Again, not really evil as we understand the word evil, but more and more of something besides God energy. So that's a much more impacting both the godly soul and the animal soul. And then they come to the lowest world, the world of Asiya, the world of descent, where, again, there's a high majority, actually, of else. And comes into our physical reality that else is truly evil as we understand the meaning of the word evil. Meaning in all the spiritual worlds, they're dealing with the shards, with the fallout from what Kabbalistically is referred to as Shviras HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels. Deliberate design by God, a reality where there's very intense lights in vessels that are not strong enough to contain those lights. Again, deliberate design. The vessels shatter, deliberate design. And the shards of those vessels fall into our reality, into what we call the worlds of tikkun, a rectification. So some shards, they all start off falling into the world of Atzilus, the world of being. And what Atzilus can absorb, it does. Then everything lower than that gets shifted to the next reality of Bria. This is how we get the else in the world. And then in Bria, again, what's on level to be absorbed by Bria is, that's where we have some sense of something else, but most of it's too low for Bria. It's transferred to the next world, the world of Yetzirah, formation. In formation, a lower world, it can absorb a lot more. Now there's a lot more sense of else, like there's God, but there's a lot more sense of else, something else. But there's things lower than Yetzirah, than formation. It can't absorb anything lower than it. Gets shifted to the next reality, Asiya. Well, Asiya is the lowest reality, so it's absorbing everything. And that's why in Asiya there could be a majority of things besides God energy. And when that comes into our physical reality, this is manifested in what we call evil. So as both the godly and animal are traversing through these 4 realms, they're affected. But when the godly soul arrives in our physical reality, she's still a neshama. She's so high to start with. She's literally a piece of God's essence that even going through the 4 worlds and being affected by them, she's still a neshama. She's still a godly being soul. But the animal soul, starts off as a neshama, starts off as a spiritual soul, but much lower energy, and therefore much more affected by the trip through those 4 spiritual domains. By the time she comes to our world, she's not a neshama anymore. She's not on the level of spirituality we call a neshama. She's called a nefesh. And that's why when Yeshaya is talking on God's reality, I have made, souls I have made, God's reality is neshamos. They're both neshama. But when we come to our reality, as the Alter Rebbe is discussing them in our self, they're not both neshama. Only the godly soul is still neshama. And that's why, using the common term for both, he uses the term nefashos, a much lower term that could work both for the godly soul, as we'll say nefesh eloki, and most needed for the animal soul, nefesh habahami. The godly soul could refer to as neshama or nefesh eloki. The animal soul is only nefesh habahami. The animal soul is never by us referred to as neshama, because in our reality, she's never neshama. Any questions on any of that? I put a lot of information in that answer. Any questions on it? All right. So the Rebbe is now going to speak about both souls, and he starts with the animal. And as we did say before, one of the reasons he starts with the animal is because the animal is beginning the process of entering the body first. Meaning, from as soon as a child is born, there's an animal soul. The newborn infant has an animal soul, complete. The godly soul comes in stages. So if I'm talking about what is to be discussed first, let's talk about what enters first, which is the animal soul in her entirety. The godly soul, as we said, first enters the lowest level of the godly soul. There are 5 levels. The first level enters at the time when a Jewish girl should receive her name, when a Jewish boy should receive his name. For the Jewish girl, it's the first Monday, Thursday, or Saturday after her birth, unless there's like a Rosh Chodesh or something like that, the first Torah reading after her birth. For the boy, it would be when he should have his circumcision on the 8th day. The second level of soul for both boy and girl enters by the time of education. I don't know if that means 3. It says the time of education. And the third level, completing the basic soul, now we have nefesh, ruach, and neshama, we have the base soul inside the body, is for a boy at his bar mitzvah when he turns 13, and a girl for her bas mitzvah when she turns 12. So notice the girls get their soul in before the boy, obviously. We see that. The 2 higher levels of soul are not automatically coming on a certain scheduled timetable. The 4th level enters when a person really achieves great spiritual refinement. And the 5th level enters generally when one is self-sacrificing for God. It could also be on Yom Kippur, the highest moment of Ne'ilah. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says every Rosh Chodesh, it's the Mashiach time of the month, so the Yechida enters. So there are unique times when the Yechida enters and leaves the person, the Yechida being that 5th highest level of soul. So since the animal soul starts off from birth, and the godly soul is coming gradually as we see, let's first talk about what enters first, the animal soul. Also, to understand this a little more, like, well, why does the animal soul come in first? On one level, we're told it's to give it a head start. Meaning, if they both entered at the exact same moment, the totality of the godly, the totality of the animal, it would be what we call a knockout. There would be no way the animal could survive. And actually, God does want it to survive. I mean, we sort of wouldn't mind the knockout. But God says, no, you're here to work. Adam amal yulat, as Job says. Man is here to work. We are here to struggle. We are here to overcome. When we understand our animal soul, as we'll be discussing now quite a bit about our animal soul broadly has 3 functions. One function, as we'll soon see, is to be the transfer of life to the body. The godly soul is the source of all life, but the godly soul doesn't directly interface with the body. The godly soul never directly interfaces with the body. Actually, every time we do a commandment, right now, we're studying Torah. I hope everyone's focused with me. You never know what's going on behind those screens, but I can say for myself, my mind, my lips, my hands, my eyes are all focused on God's Torah right now. So is my godly soul directly affecting my mind and lips and eyes and hands? No, it's too holy for that. So every time the godly soul affects us, it's always through the medium of the animal. The godly soul takes control of the animal and uses it as a vehicle to impact the body. Every time we serve God, every time our godly soul is dominant, it's always using and thereby actually refining our animal soul. And this overarching function of giving life to the body. The godly soul, the source of life, transfers that life to the animal and from there to the body. So that's one broad reason for the animal soul's existence, to be the vehicle through which the godly can reach the body. The second reason, for most of us, is to be challenged, to be the weights that we have to overcome, to be the struggles that we get stronger, that we actualize our potential, that we become who we're supposed to be through the constant challenges of the animal soul. And the third function in the tzaddik, in the most perfect godly person, the animal soul, is synthesized with the godly to become one entity. Meaning, as we discussed, in the absolutely perfect tzaddik, the most holy person who has completely destroyed his evil inclination, There's no boss over the animal because the evil's gone. So the animal becomes subsumed in the godly, and all the energy of the animal, which is a strong energy, like our sages say, Raf Tzvuos B'Koach Shor. An ox has a lot of productivity. An animal's strong, much stronger than a man. So if we can envision the godly soul as the man channeling the animal, wow, how energized is that service of God? Which is what we'll all experience by Mashiach, when of course we won't have evil. So what's going to happen to our animal? Same thing. It will be enormous energy, helping us fly so strong and high in our service of God. So the reason I'm bringing this in now is that one of the basic functions of the animal is the challenge. So if both the animal and the godly enter at the same time and it was a knockout and we won, instantly as a newborn baby, because the godly's so much more powerful, which it is, well, then we wouldn't have that whole challenge. We wouldn't have its purpose. So we allow the animal soul to get this footing in us, to get this head start, and the godly soul to gradually come in. So the challenge, the equilibrium is maintained, and we can truly grow through the efforts of overcoming the animal. Additionally, based on what I just said, the godly soul cannot come in first because the godly soul can't directly interface with your body. Just as we just explained, that the godly soul needs the vehicle of the animal to affect my mind, to be able to study God's Torah, to affect my lips, to be able to say God's words, to affect my hands, to be able to move and gesture, to emphasize the points. Well, for that same reason, the godly soul can't directly come into your body. She can't directly touch your body. She can't directly interface with your body. So when she enters the body, she's entering within the film, the garment of the animal. That's always, always, always her interface with the body, which is why the animal has to be there first. So again, the godly soul is mentioned later because she comes in later. The godly soul comes in later to maintain that sense of choice, that sense of balance, that sense of challenge. And the godly soul comes in later because she has to come in via the animal, because she can never directly reach the body herself. She is way too intently godly to directly go to our body. So the Alter Rebbe is saying that we have these two souls, and we're going to start, as we just explained, talking about the animal. So we're looking at our discussion on the animal. The Alter Rebbe says that this animal soul is from Klipa, one term that we've discussed, Sitra Achra, another term that we've mentioned, and engarbed in the blood of the person to give life to the body. So right away, the Alter Rebbe tells us three very significant facts about the animal soul. She's from Klipa, she's from Sitra Achra, and her job is to be in the blood location because of her function to give life to the body. So let's unpack those pieces of information. She's from Klipa. So as we've discussed this term before in chapter 1, because of course it's come up in our discussions. So just briefly to remind you, Klipa literally means a shell. And it's a shell, a husk, a covering around God's energy. As we've learned, there's two levels of Klipa. Klipos Timeos, which means impure shells, shells that the godliness within them is inaccessible. And Klipas Noiga, Klipa, again, the shell. Noiga means a shine, that the shine of God's energy, the light of God's energy is shining through the shell. So I can access God within that shell. And we have discussed this at length. I'm just reminding you this here in terms of our discussion of the animal soul. The animal soul is from Klipa. The animal soul of a Jew is from Klipas Noiga. A Klipa, not a godly entity. There's a shell. There's a barrier on God's energy, but it's an accessible shell. If you remember, we compared it to like an apple peel instead of like a walnut shell of Klipas Timeos. So since it's an apple peel, I can bite into that apple, get the apple through the peel. Since this is Klipas Noiga, it means this is an entity I can utilize to serve God. Klipas Timeos, items from Klipas Timeos, are entities that I serve God by not doing, by abstaining, by crushing my desire to do. What's Klipas Noiga? Everything permissible in this world. That's not innately holy. What's Klipas Timeos? Everything forbidden in this world. So if it's forbidden, God's saying, yes, there's God energy in it, because if there wasn't, it wouldn't be. but you cannot access that energy. The best you could do is abstain from it. And through that abstinence, you're somewhat weakening the evil, blocking the God energy within it. Klipas Noiga, you can utilize to serve God. And when you do, you actually shift and change the energy and move it from the realm of Klipa, which still means a barrier, to the realm of Kedusha, when it's revealed God energy. In our world, if we would look at the totality of our world, the majority of our world is Klipas Noiga. Meaning, if you would think of all the things that are innately godly, which is called Kedusha, there's very, very, very few. If you would think of all the things that are innately forbidden, well, there's 365 prohibitions of Torah and many more the rabbis added. But still, if you would add up all of those items and then compare it to everything else in the world, you would see numerically that the majority of the world is Klipas Noiga. The majority of the world is not innately godly, for sure not. Almost nothing is innately godly. But it's also not innately forbidden. It's not innately Klipas Tmeos. It's Klipas Noiga. It's a potential. God energy, everything's God energy, wrapped up in a husk where God's not revealed. But I have the ability, utilizing this item in the service of God, to shift its energy from Klipas Noiga, where the God energy is concealed, to Kedusha, where it's revealed. Like my apple, right? Apples are permissible, assuming it's not in the first 3 years or stolen, or, normal generic apple is permissible. Say a blessing, enjoy it. Use the energy to serve God. I shifted that apple from Klipas Noiga to Kedusha. And that's the majority of this world. The majority of our actions are not Klipas Noiga, meaning it's very rare, actually, for us to do, think, say, or feel on the level of Klipas Noiga. Almost never. What we do or think or feel or say is either usually Kedusha, godliness. It's a mitzvah or it's a service of God, right? Something might not be one of the 613 or one of the rabbis' ordained commandments, but it's for the sake of God. If you're getting dressed and you're looking good as a Jewish woman, well, which commandment is that? It's living a life for God and representing God and looking good. That's for the sake of God. Is that Klipas Noiga? No. Is that Klipas Tmeos? Not at all. It's Kedusha. So it could be a commandment, either biblical or rabbinic, or it could be living a life for God or doing something for the sake of a commandment, right? If you're going shopping to have food to feed your family for the sake of God, right? Your family needs to eat to survive. You're buying them kosher food. You're going to cook them this kosher food. Let alone if you're buying it for Shabbos or the holiday. But I'm saying even if you're just making your family supper, well, that's part of serving God. God gave you these children. He gave you this family. He's entrusting you with these souls, and you got to feed them. What's the commandment? It's for the sake of God. If you're living a life for God, then the way you're making supper is also for God. It's for the sake of God. As I'm saying, the majority of this world is Klipas Noiga. There are things God forbade, and there's very, very few things that are innately holy. The majority of the world is permissible, and our job with it is to use it to serve God, as versus to use it for self, or be pulled down by it, or do something inappropriate with it. But in terms of our self, what we do, what we think, what we feel, what we say, generally it's either godly in the realm of Kedusha or forbidden. If it's a transgression, or even if it's a desire, it's in the realm, somewhere in the realm of forbidden. If it's a commandment or for the sake of God, it's Kedusha, it's holiness. And if it's like purely neutral, like not forbidden and not a commandment and not a desire and not for the sake of God, it's just like functional survival, like brushing your teeth, that would be a moment of Klipas Noiga in our life. But again, if your life is for God, then brushing your teeth is also for God. So that would already move it to the realm of Kedusha. So that was the concept of Klipa. So our animal soul is Klipa, meaning specifically Klipas Noiga, which is really telling us a lot of information about my animal soul. It's telling me, well, it's not innately godly, but it's innately potential. So I said before, the animal soul is the vehicle through which the godly soul can impact the body. The animal soul is the vehicle of challenge for me to actualize my potential. And the animal soul is ultimately in the tzaddik, or when we become the tzaddikim by Mashiach, when we're pure godly people, to be utilized to serve God. This concept that the animal soul is Klipas Noiga is very important in the first and third reason I gave. Meaning, as a challenge, honestly, it can be evil to be a challenge, right? It can be totally forbidden and pushing me in the wrong direction. But the fact that it's klipas noiga means there's a possibility of me shifting this animal to God. Well, that first huge job of the animal, to be the vehicle through which the godly impacts the body, means a constant shift. Every time my godly is in control, like right now when we're studying Torah. So my mind and your mind, all of our minds are refined by the godliness of Tanya that's in our brain cells. So the animal soul, not only is my godly soul strengthened, because I'm learning Torah, not only are my human brain souls shifting, because they're saturated with God's will and wisdom, but my animal soul is changing, because my animal soul is a vehicle through which the godly can impact the brain cells, right? When I'm studying Torah right now, it's my godly soul harnessing my animal to impact my human mind. The godly soul is getting strengthened. We're doing commandment. We're connecting to God. We're nullified to God. We've got Torah pouring through. The human brain is changed. There's godliness in it. She's part of a mitzvah. She's part of a commandment. And the animal soul is changed because she's the interface. How can she be changed? Because she's klipas noiga. Because her essence, spiritual matter, means, just like I move that apple, I'm eating it with a blessing. I'm eating it to serve God because my whole life is about serving God. So my apple is also about serving God. I'm taking that energy and doing good things with it. The apple moves to the side of godliness. I'm taking my animal soul, and she's the vehicle now through which Torah can impact my brain cell. Well then, again, the animal soul is shifting. So of course, there's the ultimate shift in our stage 3, our third reason for the animal soul's existence, to be subsumed in the godly, like the perfect tzaddik who's removed all evil, like all of us by Mashiach, by the redemption. When of course, the klipas noiga completely shifts to godliness. But even in ourselves, literally, minute by minute, commandment by commandment, service of God by service of God, we are shifting that klipas noiga to kedusha. So that's a very huge understanding of the animal soul by understanding she's klipa, and of course, specifically klipas noiga. So the second thing the Alter Rebbe said is she is from Sitra Achra. Sitra Achra, if you're confused by that term, is Aramaic. It means the other side. In Hebrew, you'd say like tzad acher, but it's a Kabbalistic term and it's Aramaic, as much in Kabbalah as Aramaic, or definitely a certain amount in Kabbalah is Aramaic, like a certain amount of Talmud is Aramaic, a certain amount of Zohar is Aramaic. So the other side, what do we mean by the other side? On one hand, this world is very nuanced, right? Lots and lots of grays. On the other hand, it's actually very simple. There's white and there's black. And when I'm looking at it as a white and black world, the white is called Sitra Dikedusha, again Aramaic, meaning God's side, the side of holiness, and Sitra Achra, meaning the other side. We don't want to say anything negative, so we don't say the evil side, the bad side, the non-godly side. We say the other side. So Sitra Dikedusha, God's side, the side of holiness, and Sitra Achra, the other side. What's on the other side? Well, everything that gets its vitality from klipa is on the other side. So as we just explained, there's klipas noiga, and there's klipas tameus. Klipas noiga, again, the source of life for everything not innately godly and not innately forbidden, like the apples and walnuts, and pens and cell phones, and computers, and beds, and rooms, and homes, and all that's klipas noiga. All that gets its energy from is not forbidden, is not innately godly. Klipas noiga. And everything forbidden. Everything that God said no. Mixture of wool and linen gets its vitality from klipas noiga. Words of gossip gets its vitality from klipas noiga. Stolen goods, that moment is getting its vitality from klipas noiga. Sitra Achra is encompassing both of those elements. So very interesting. So let's go back to our apple. So we have our apple. Again, nothing wrong with it. Not stolen. It's not Yom Kippur and you're not allowed to eat. It's not the tree in its first 3 years. Like there's no technical legalistic problems with the apple. What's its life source? Klipas noiga. Great opportunity. I can shift this. I can make a blessing with it, eat it, and use the energy to do good. Once I use that energy to do good, the apple's energy becomes shifted to the side of holiness. Sitra de Kedusha, side of holiness. But until then, when she's just in her raw apple state, she's part of Sitra Achra. She's literally part of the other side because she's potential. I could shift her quite easily to God's side. But until a Jew interacts with that apple and shifts the apple to God's side, she's Sitra Achra. As I said, the majority of this world is Klipas Noiga, which means the majority of the world we can use. The majority of the world potentially is very, very accessible to God. And it just takes a Jew to do something good with it, do something for God with it, and it shifts. But until the Jew does that, all of this potential for God is only potential. It's all on the side of Sitra Achra. So on one hand, Klipas Noiga, so natural and easy to shift. On the other hand, until you shift that Klipas Noiga, it's part of Sitra Achra. Much later in Tanya, in chapter 36, 37, really 37, when we're discussing how we could bring Mashiach, it actually has a lot to do with this concept of shifting all that Klipas Noiga to Kedusha, removing from evil its vehicle for life, and thereby removing it from the world. So this shifting of those apples and everything else in our world that's permissible is actually very, very significant. Not just for ourselves, not just for the item, but really for the whole cosmos, for the whole world. So again, animal soul klipa, got that term. Animal soul Sitra Achra, we got that term. What else did the Alter Rebbe tell us about the animal soul? What were the first facts? Found in blood, because she gives life to the body. So we're being told there, location. She's found in the blood. But location is right away connected to functionality, because blood is life, and the animal soul is giving life to the body. Now, as we said, and we listed this in one of the 3 jobs of the animal soul, it was actually the first thing I told you, the animal soul is giving life, but not on her own. The animal soul is klipa. Klipa isn't the source of life. The source of life is God. So the godly soul is really the source of life, but the godly soul can't directly interface with the body, we said. So the godly soul is taking godly life and using the animal soul as the vehicle to give this godly life to the body. And that's why the animal soul, in her nicest fashion, is referred to as not Nefesh HaBahami, which literally means animal soul, but Nefesh HaChiyuni, which means vital soul, soul of vitality, because she gives life. She gives vitality to the body. So from the godly soul, via the animal, to the body. So this is like her job, her functionality, and as such, she's connected with the blood. Because on the physical plane, and again, the physical is mirroring the spiritual, on the physical plane, the blood is carrying life, right? We know the blood, right, is pumping through the heart, interface between the heart and the lungs. The blood gets oxygenated. It travels through our body, bringing the conveyor of the oxygen, and at the same time, picking up, absorbing all that carbon dioxide, gets back into the heart through the right ventricle, and again, connecting to the lungs, expels all that carbon dioxide, and gets a new infusion of oxygen, and then going through the left ventricle and into the body, saturated by that oxygen to give life to the body. So we're connecting the animal soul to the blood because on the physical plane, the blood is a source of life. And on the spiritual plane, the animal soul, being the transfer point from the godly, is giving us life. So the real life comes from the spirit, comes from the animal, comes from the godly. And this is mirrored in the blood. Based on all of that, we can actually understand, here we're saying it's in the blood. If we would look technically at the verse that we have not yet read, discussing the animal soul, that we're connected to the animal soul being from the blood in that verse is not blood running through your body. It's actually blood from the heart. Because when we're saying the animal soul is found in the blood, we actually mean the blood in the heart and the blood in the left side of the heart. As I just reminded you, there's the 2 ventricles, right and left. The right side is the blood in its weakest state, right? It's after the blood has gone through the whole body, distributed all that oxygen, absorbed all that carbon dioxide. It's now saturated with the carbon dioxide, comes to the right ventricle, and then expels that carbon dioxide and absorbs the new oxygen from the lungs and is now saturated with oxygen in the left side. So if we look at that blood, in its most oxygenated space is in the left ventricle. In its weakest, least oxygen, most carbon monoxide space is in the right side. So therefore, the left side, where the blood is strongest, that's where the animal soul is found. So literally, physically, in your body, if you cut it up and dissect it, you would never be able to pull out that animal soul because it's a spiritual entity. It is in a physical locale in the left ventricle of the heart where the blood is strongest, because that's the energy of the animal soul. Again, giving life. And of course, something else we connect with the blood and with the heart is emotions. And the animal soul is definitely a very emotional animal, very dominated by emotions, ruled by emotions. The intellect is very small in the animal soul and has a very minor function. It's primarily an emotional entity. And of course, we're probably very familiar with the very intense emotions of that animal. So in the blood, that's locale. Specifically, blood means blood of the heart. Specifically, blood of the heart means blood of the left ventricle. And because of her function, giving life to the body, well, in that left ventricle blood, that's the blood that gives life to the body. Any questions on any of this? All right. Yes.
That's great anatomy for you.
You know, everything in the physical world is a reflection of the spiritual world. So when we're looking at the anatomy, we obviously have to understand that this is an expression of what's happening spiritually. Just like everything else is really all an expression of God's energy. Absolutely. So looking inside, we actually got to where we were up to, though we sort of read everything quickly and didn't really have time to really discuss it as we're doing now. But looking inside, we're 5 lines from the bottom. So we're just talking about the animal soul, where in the blood, as we're saying, of the heart, of the left side, because of her function to give life to the body. As is written, ki nefesh habasar. Nefesh here actually doesn't mean soul. It means the vitality, the life of the body. Bidamhi is in the blood. And actually that blood in the verse is referring to the blood of the heart. Umimenabos kol hamidos raos. And from that animal soul, if in case you didn't know, comes all of our negative traits. From the 4 negative elements that she's comprised of. So let's explain a little bit what this means. Everything in our world, everything in our physical world, everything in our spiritual world, everything in the spiritual godly world, everything in the spiritual non-godly, we'll call it, evil world, all is comprised of 4 elements: fire, earth, wind, and water. And just, it's so interesting how primordial man just senses, like the most basic tambourine strokes are fire, earth, wind, and water. Snapple once had a run of Snapple bottles, fire, earth, wind, and water. You know, this is foundation, right? You have earth, solids, water, liquids, wind, gas, and fire, the energy of going from one state to another. This is the whole physical world. And it's the whole physical world, as I just said, because the physical represents the spiritual. And it's the whole spiritual world. And it's a spiritual world both on the godly and on the non-godly side. So we just read that all of your negative traits come from your animal soul. If you're looking to blame someone, now you got the target, the dartboard, your animal soul. All of those things you don't like about yourself come from your animal soul. Why? Because the animal soul is comprised of fire, earth, wind, and water. And fire, earth, wind, and water create negative emotions that you're challenged by. Guess what? Your godly soul also is comprised of fire, earth, wind, and water. But a godly fire, earth, wind, and water that's giving us godly powers. So we'll first start with the animal version, as the Rebbe is. And then, not today, we will discuss what on the side of the godly soul is fire, earth, wind, and water. Meaning, these are the only ingredients you have. Like if you had flour, sugar, eggs, and oil, okay? Whatever different percentages you're going to use of your flour, sugar, eggs, and oils, what you're going to make. But this is your 4 ingredients, right? This is it. So you have H, Ruach, Mayim, Afer, fire, earth, wind, and water. That's the ingredients. That's the composition of everything. So does everything look exactly the same? Of course not. Because I've got a little more fire, a little more earth, a little more wind, a little less water, like depending on the exact recipe, depending on exactly the percentages of those ingredients, is going to determine what's going to be. But it all comes from fire, earth, wind, and water. As I'm saying, it's not only, well, to make an animal soul, you need a certain amount of fire, a certain amount of earth, a certain amount of wind, a certain amount of water. Even individually, for each one of us, our animal soul is different based on, do I have more fire? Do I have more earth? Do I have more wind? Do I have more water? We could have different compositions. Absolutely, we do. As we can see very clearly, because the Alter Rebbe is now going to explain what negative traits we get from fire, earth, wind, and water. And depending on which you have more of, you can be like, oh, that's me. I know. I can identify now. I can give you the recipe for my animal soul, because I know what I have more from this fire, earth, wind, and water composition. It becomes very, very, very obvious.